Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Year Ahead in Cannabis, BDSA's 2023 predictions for the cannabis industry. My name is Rick Maturo, and joining me today is my colleague Brendan Mitchell Cheesebro, who is an analyst and content manager here at BDSA. Now, before we formally kick things off, I just want to cover a few housekeeping and agenda items. First, this deck and recording of this presentation will be made available to all attendees, so no need to take copious detailed notes if that's not your style. Second, we will be hosting a question and answer section at the end of the presentation. So if at any point you have a question, please feel free to type your question into the question field under the question dropdown in the webinar control panel on your screen. Third, we want to hear from you during this webinar. So we will be conducting 3 poll questions at various points during the presentation. So when it is time for you to cast your vote, you will see the poll pop up on your screen at that time. Once the poll is up, use your mouse to click the answer that best represents your choice. At the end of the webinar, we will share the results of the poll and some of our thoughts on your responses to the poll. Now, one last thing before we get to the content. I just want to take a quick moment to talk about BDSA. So for those of you who aren't familiar with BDSA, BDSA is a leader in the cannabis market intelligence space. And BDSA offers 4 core data products in addition to its professional services division. The first product is BDSA's retail sales tracking product, which offers granular retail sales data on 14 states in the US. BDSA's retail sales tracking gives visibility into category sales, unit sales, leading brands and products, as well as the leading brand houses across the largest markets. And BDSA's second product is BDSA's Consumer Insights, a dynamic and broad consumer-based survey that's updated twice a year. Consumer Insights gives a look into consumer demographics, psychographics, purchasing behavior, and consumption drivers, as well as trended views of all of these data points going back more than 4 years. Our third product is our market forecast product, which gives a comprehensive high-level picture of where cannabis markets worldwide are going in the next 5 years. With a specific focus on North American markets, BDSA's market forecasts include projected consumer growth, sales growth by channel, and projected legal sales by product category. BDSA's fourth and newest product is its menu analytics product. BDSA's menu analytics puts the granular retail landscape at your fingertips to increase sales and margins with dashboards that combine the depth and breadth of our retail sales tracking data with new insights on product availability to give the user a comprehensive and granular set of metrics covering distribution, inventory, and velocity for brands and products. So now that you know a little bit about BDSA, I want to hand things off to my colleague Brendan to walk us through BDSA's 2023 predictions and start us off with a quick recap of 2022 in review. So Brendan, handing things over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Rick. So we've got a whole lot of stuff to cover, so we're just going to jump right into it. Going into the new year, it was really clear that the industry was at a turning point. There was a whole host of issues impacting every legal state. Price compression was top of mind for a lot of people. Price compression has impacted profitability across the board, and it's already starting to drive brand consolidation, which is an issue we'll get into shortly. Regulatory uncertainty is definitely nothing new, but as profitability has been impacted by price compression and increased cost of goods and labor due to economic inflation, the need for regulatory relief is bigger than ever. And so our hopes that passage of reforms to legal markets at the state and federal level will be coming through shortly. All in all, it's clear that the days of really rapid growth through the industry are sort of coming to an end, and brands and retailers need specific data-driven strategies to help address these complex issues. So despite these challenges, industry uncertainty definitely isn't reflected in consumers' interest in cannabis overall. Even in the most mature markets, we're seeing consumer participation continue to grow just this year versus past years. So across California, Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, we've seen a significant jump in consumer participation just between spring 2020 and fall 2022. Along with this, we've seen a lot of new consumers aging into the market and consumers who previously bought from illicit or gray market channels moving into the regulated market as well. So looking at the current US cannabis landscape, talking about consumer penetration growth is just one piece of the story. Each year we've seen more and more states legalize adult use, and states with more limited medical programs have expanded access, added more qualifying conditions, allowed more cannabis form factors, and do all these things to improve the state of their cannabis programs. So this is the current legalization landscape in the US. As of today, 95% of Americans live in a state that has at least some form of medical cannabis, and this is excluding very limited CBD only programs. And over 50% of adults over the age of 21 live in states that have legalized adult use. So sort of backtracking, looking at the progress in legalization over the past year, we saw pretty mixed results from the 2022 midterms when it came to legalization referendums statewide. Maryland and Missouri did join the ranks of states that have legalized adult use, and those are two really promising markets. We're predicting Missouri to launch adult use sales in 2024, and the adult use channel is projected to bring in about $280 million in legal sales for that year. By 2026, we project Missouri to grow to roughly $1.3 billion in total legal sales. Maryland is also projected to start adult use sales in 2024, and we're forecasting Maryland to reach about $1.2 billion in total legal sales by 2026. Excuse me. The midterms also have promising results for other states that have been working towards adult use cannabis for years. Sort of a recap of some of those we think they're most important. Pennsylvania, really strong medical market as it stands. Pennsylvania Democrats have maintained the hold of the governor's mansion, re-electing Josh Shapiro, who's a pro-reform candidate to the governor's office, and expanding their majority in the legislature. These are both really good signs. It's sort of pointing towards increased chances that Pennsylvania will legalize adult use in 2023. We expect that if they do legalize this year, sales will start in 2025 and total just about $500 million for first year of adult use sales. Minnesota also had really good results in the midterms. Minnesota Democrats are already signaling that legalizing cannabis is going to be among their top priorities in 2023. And this is coming on the heels of a significant expansion in their medical program. In 2022, patients in Minnesota's medical program went up about 34% over 2021, now totaling about 40,000. Dispensary visits also went up about 83% in 2022 versus 2021, from 170,000 visits in 2021 to over 310,000 visits in 2022. So with that quick wrap up, we can just get right into our predictions. And our first prediction is that price compression and illicit competition will drive brand consolidation in mature cannabis markets. So the story of price compression is nothing new to anybody who's been paying attention to the industry over the past year and a half. Mature markets, here we're looking at Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, and Oregon, saw equivalent average retail prices, that's average retail prices equivalized to 1 gram, fall about 13% between Q3 2021 and Q3 2022. This decline was even more dramatic in some states. Price compression hit over 20% in Arizona over that same period, and some states saw even more price compression. So we know that price is really important for retaining consumers at retail and driving product decisions. But what effect does this price compression have when we're looking at the cannabis brand landscape and the roles that large MSOs play in legal cannabis markets? So sort of getting into our data from our brand house tracking tool, this showed that the dominant MSOs across legal markets that BDSA tracks saw sizable gains over this period. BDSA brand house tracking shows that the top 5 brand houses grew from roughly a 14% share in Q1 2021 to roughly an 18% share in Q3 2022. This is talking about share of overall total dollar sales. There are differences in how this happens from market to market, and we expect consolidation in markets that have a heavy MSO presence, like Illinois, to be a lot greater. And we expect independent homegrown brands to remain stronger in these higher growth markets that have less restrictive licensing. An example of that would be for like Missouri, for example. And keep in mind, none of this is to say that the brand landscape in the cannabis industry is going to become monolithic by any means. We expect new brands to continue to enter mature markets as they see new opportunities with new product form factors, and as underperforming brands leave more mature markets. And these new entrants are likely to be a mix of MSO brands and independent brands. So with that, it's time to jump into our first poll break. And as Rick mentioned earlier, this is just to get your pulse on how the industry is going. So there's no right answer, just whatever you feel you want to go with. The first poll question is, what product subcategory do you see as primed for growth in 2023? A, live resin infused pre-roll. B, disposable vapes. C, powdered drink mixes. Or D, fast-acting gummy edibles. So I'll give you a few moments to answer this poll, then we'll get on with our next questions. All right, thank you so much for participating. We'll get on to our next prediction right now. So our second prediction is that despite being the newest, biggest new market for the year, New York's market launch will be stunted. So sort of going over the positives first, just looking at the demographic figures and some of our consumer data from New York, there's no doubt that there's huge opportunity in the New York market. There's a 21 plus population of over 15 million people, which is pointing to the fact that New York will be the largest new market this year by a huge margin. BDSA's consumer data also shows that New York's consumer participation leading up to the adult use launch is already on par with that of California and just behind the aggregate of all US adult use markets. This is coming with an ongoing trend of states seeing faster consumer growth compared to past markets that legalized. So for context, New York's market saw the same rate of growth over 2 years in consumer penetration that California's market took over 3 years to achieve. When we talk about the limitations of the New York market, a good place to start is looking at retail footprint, and it's especially helpful to compare how other markets stack up on their first day of sales as far as retail availability. Arizona, which launched adult use sales in a record, I think it was less than 90 days after legalization, had 86 retailers licensed to sell on the first day of adult use. Neighboring New Jersey, neighboring New York that is, was able to get 13 stores online in the first days of adult use sales, and that's coming on the heels of massively ramping up the medical program. On the more limited side, Michigan started adult use sales with just 3 storefronts, but they were able to really quickly build on this with their medical industry infrastructure and rapidly increase availability. And they also allowed medical licensees to transfer over product to adult use stores in an effort to avoid major shortages. So all these markets are really different and they saw different paths to adult use, but one common thread is that the ones that saw the strongest early performance in the adult use era were able to build off of very strong medical programs. By contrast, New York's medical program was very limited and it saw sales stagnate and even dip towards the end of 2022, which is uncharacteristic for markets that are on the verge of launching adult use. Furthermore, New York is unique in that all the retail licenses for the first few years of the adult use program are going to go to conditional social equity licensees, meaning that the medical infrastructure that they have, which is limited, isn't going to be readily available to increase retail availability in the adult use channel. There are some really promising signs. There's the fact that New York is allowing delivery in the adult use program, and there's been announcements of recent wide-scale enforcement actions on their really sizable illicit market. But markets that have been dealing with illicit competition for years, like California, show that interdiction and crackdowns on illicit are just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to shifting over consumers from the illicit channel over to licensed retailers. But even with all these setbacks, New York is still set to be $1 billion+ market in 2023. But that's a far cry of what it could have been from what it could have been had all these regulatory issues not been as big of a problem leading up to the launch of adult use sales. A point of comparison that illustrates this missed opportunity is our estimated per consumer spending on adult use cannabis. And keep in mind that the numbers in this table here exclude illicit and medical channel spending. So on this metric, we see that New York per consumer spending is a fraction of what it is in projected to be in neighboring New Jersey this year, which had just started adult use sales in April of last year. Before going forward, I'd also like to note that we're on the verge of launching our new market forecast wave, which is going to give a much more detailed and updated picture of New York's size of industry and the forecast for the medical and adult use channels. And with that, we can get into our third prediction, and that is that solventless products are primed to be a leading premium form factor in 2023. So solventless concentrates actually covers a huge number of subcategories of concentrates. This includes some of the oldest forms of cannabis concentrates that we've had for thousands of years, as well as some new concentrates that utilize the newest technology and newest manufacturing. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to just focus in on a few solventless concentrates that have held up really well given the conditions in legal cannabis markets over the past year and a half. The category that's top of mind for a lot of people when you mention solventless concentrates is rosin, and there's really good reason for that. Rosin has seen its share of dollar dabbable sales roughly double between January 2020 and November 2022, and making up about 16% of dabbable dollar sales across California, Colorado, Oregon, Michigan, and Illinois. Rosin has also maintained much higher prices at retail, even after 18 months of continued price compression that has hit all categories in the cannabis industry. So retail sales tracking shows a few different trends which are really promising for solventless products in different ways. As I mentioned earlier, even after major price declines that were greater than those seen in the total dabbable category, rosin is still commanding higher retail prices than dabbables as a whole and higher retail prices than competing form factors like live resin. So between Q1 2021 and Q4 2022, rosin saw roughly 33% price compression. This is compared to roughly 30% price compression in the live resin category and 20% price compression in the total dabbable category. Even with this, we see rosin commanding about 40% higher average retail price than live resin and 45% higher average retail price than total dabbables. And when we look at other solventless subcategories, specifically hash and bubble hash, we see other promising trends. Namely, we see that they've seen much smaller price declines than dabbables as a whole. So hash has only seen about a 12% average retail price decline between Q1 2021 and Q4 2022. Bubble hash, on the other side, has seen about 15% price declines between Q1 2021 and Q4 2022, with prices for bubble hash landing at about $21 per gram in Q4 2022. And with that, we are going to take another quick poll break, this one covering new cannabis markets and cross-border shopping. So which emerging cannabis market do you think will see the most gains from cross-border shopping in 2023? Is it A, New Jersey, B, Vermont, C, New Mexico, or D, Montana? So I'll give you a few moments to answer this, then we'll get on with our next prediction. All right, thank you so much for your participation in that poll. And we're going to get on to our next prediction, which is that minor cannabinoids and terpenes will take center stage as mood and effect drivers in 2023. So as the industry has grown, as consumers have become more sophisticated and knowledgeable, we see that consumers, more and more consumers know that cannabis means a lot more than just THC. In the past 3 years, knowledge of cannabis has increased, along with knowledge of cannabinoids specifically, and knowledge of terpenes. This is especially true in more mature markets like Colorado, where almost half of consumers have a working knowledge of cannabinoids and what they do, and about a third of consumers have a working knowledge of terpenes and their effects. So from the perspective of brands and retailers, increasing consumer knowledge of cannabis in these areas has a ton of utility. Consumer data show that consumers look for products that drive consistent, repeatable benefits. The traditional way of signaling mood and effect by labeling indica, sativa, and hybrid on products works really well for some consumers, but for others, it lacks the specificity and the consistency that information about cannabinoid content, cannabinoid ratios, and terpene profiles can provide. So an example of this shortcoming might be somebody who lives in Colorado who is a flower consumer. They love the strain Gorilla Glue. They buy it all the time. They know which brands produce the Gorilla Glue that they like. They might go to Massachusetts and buy the same strain and be surprised to not get the same effect. And this make them less likely to go back to buying that product or buying that strain when they travel out of state in the future. So when we dig more into attributes that consumers are willing to pay more for, we see big opportunity to utilize minor cannabinoids as tools to signal and drive these consistent, repeatable benefits. 30% of consumers say that they're willing to pay more for products that promise specific benefits. Also, when we're looking at the reasons for why consumers consume, we see big opportunity to exploit minor cannabinoids for specific use cases. So looking at the top 3 reasons for consuming cannabis, wanting to sleep better and wanting to relieve pain consistently are in the top 3 reasons for consuming. And each of these need states can be addressed by minor cannabinoids, such as CBN and CBG, respectively. So this consumer data about knowledge of minor cannabinoids and how shopping and purchase decision drivers might influence consumers towards them is also supported by our retail sales tracking data. So when we look at data from California, Colorado, Nevada, and Oregon, we see really consistent, almost linear growth in the share of dollar sales by candy edible products that are containing either CBN or CBG. So backtracking to January of 2020, we went from CBN and CBG having almost no presence in even the most mature legal cannabis markets to almost 1/5 of candy edibles containing either of these 2 cannabinoids in November 2022. A look at the top brands list in mature markets also shows this trend towards CBN and CBG becoming the norm as signifiers of mood and effect. So BDSA data show that all of the top 10 gummy brands in California for Q3 2022 offered at least one product with CBN or CBG. And with that, we will get into our next prediction, and that is that new strategies will be needed at retail to meet the needs of a post-pandemic consumer base. So cannabis was definitely affected by the pandemic, and while the impact of the pandemic wasn't as severe on the cannabis industry as it was for other industries, there were major adjustments that had to be made in how retail worked across the country. Even when we just look at markets that allowed non-storefront retail before the pandemic, such as California, we saw many more consumers opting to get their cannabis from delivery or mail order service in late 2020 compared to early in 2019. Some markets, such as Nevada, moved to delivery only model in response to COVID, but delivery took a bigger role even in markets that still allowed storefront retail throughout the pandemic. Direct-to-consumer sales has also been a growing trend. Some of the largest brands and brand houses have been exploring direct-to-consumer sales in markets that allow. So when we dive deeper into consumer data indicate that consumers still will be motivated to use delivery, curbside pickup, and mail order, even when storefront retail options are available. A biggest driver of store choice for dispensary shoppers is convenience. Things like price and trustworthiness definitely matter, but when push comes to shove, consumers want to get their cannabis in a way that's most convenient to them. And for a lot of people, that means delivery. Delivery is also being expanded in markets that are both new and really established. So New York, as I mentioned earlier, is planning to lean heavily on delivery to expand their limited retail availability. And Illinois, which has been active for a few years, is also moving towards launching delivery. So with that, we can get into our third and final poll. So which of these do you think will come first? A, the passage of the Safe Banking Act. B, start of adult use sales in Germany. Or C, Minnesota legalizing adult use. So we'll give you a few moments to answer this, then we'll get on to our final predictions. All right, thank you so much. Getting on to our final prediction, and that is that we expect the Northeast and international markets to hold the biggest opportunities in 2023. So just taking a peek at the performance of established cannabis markets versus more emerging cannabis markets in 2022 gives us a window into what we can expect as far as growth in 2023. Price compression, oversupply, illicit competition, these really meant big problems across the board for mature markets out west, most of which, as you can see here, saw declines in 2022 versus 2021. The main exception to this we see is Arizona, which saw slight growth in 2022 over 2021, but it's important to keep in mind that Arizona just launched adult use in January of 2021. So this 2022 growth is partially due to the benefits that it reaped from being a newer adult use market. So pricing declines have made growth in more mature markets even harder to achieve because most of the interested consumer base already has legal access. Whereas in new and emerging markets, there's more new consumers to convert, and there was more consumers who are in the illicit or gray market channels who you can bring over to the regulated channel. Here we see the compound annual growth rates through 2026 for mature markets on the left and newer and emerging markets on the right. Even when we look at California, which has the highest expected growth of this bucket of mature markets, a main reason for this is just due to the facts that one, California has a slightly lower consumer rate compared to other markets of its size and maturity level like Colorado or Oregon. And two, there's a huge illicit channel in California, which is still ongoing and which the regulated channel will be able to cannibalize to see growth in the coming years. So taking a look at the top 15 markets by 2026, we see a couple of really interesting trends. One, going over the established mature Western markets, we still see a couple of veteran markets like California, Colorado at the top of the list as far as top 15 markets by 2026. But a lot of the other Western markets that are really established like Washington, Oregon, Arizona, they've dropped down to the bottom here. Midwestern markets like Michigan and Illinois are also going to be really sizable, with some amount of this growth coming from cross-border buying. But the biggest story by far comes from the Northeast, which is primed to become one of the first regional superpowers in the cannabis industry. And it's notable that there's 4 really densely populated states, New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, which are expected to bring in a combined $10 billion in sales by 2026. So New York markets, Northeast markets, differ from West Coast markets in a number of ways. A lot of them generally have more stringent regulations, more stringent license requirements, and we're seeing this in New York especially. And this is posing some challenges to some MSOs in markets that are more limited like New York. But these limitations are unlikely to stunt overall growth as retail availability and supply remain sufficient. So with that, we can just jump into our wrap up and summary. So here's our full list of predictions for the legal cannabis industry in 2023. 1, continued price compression and illicit competition will continue to drive brand consolidation in mature markets. 2, despite being the biggest market in 2023, New York will see stunted adult use sales in the coming year. 3, even after significant price declines, solventless products are primed for premiumization. 4, Minor cannabinoids and terpenes will take center stage as drivers of mood and effect. 5, new strategies will be needed at retail to meet the needs of a consumer base in a post-pandemic era. And finally, as mature markets falter and see declines, expect the Northeast and international markets to be the biggest opportunities in 2023. So across this list, we see some challenges that are posed to the industry. We see a lot of opportunities that are available to people in the industry, but addressing these challenges in the most nimble way and making the most out of these opportunities really is going to require a data-based approach to see the most success in the coming year. And with that, we can get into some of our poll results. And the results for the first poll, it looks like, yeah, the big winner was fast-acting gummy edibles, and after that, live resin pre-roll. So yeah, that's really interesting. Fast-acting gummy edibles, fast onset, isn't really highly ranked as a purchase decision driver when we look at our consumer insights data. We have about 11% of consumers in adult use states who cite fast onset as a purchase decision driver. This is compared to about 36% who are looking for high THC content and 32% who are choosing products based on taste and flavor. But that doesn't always tell the whole story. A lot of people, they want convenience, they want a cheaper product, lower price, they want high THC, but a lot of newer consumers especially, I think, will be driven towards products that offer fast-acting effects because it just makes certain consumption aspects a little bit easier. Looking at live resin infused pre-rolls, there's actually a huge amount of growth that we've seen in this category over the past 2 years. So live resin infused pre-rolls grew, well, infused pre-roll overall grew from about 23% in early 2021 to about 34% in Q4 2022 when we're looking at the share it makes up of total pre-roll sales. So ton of opportunity there. Especially when you think about the taste and flavor, how live resin really excels in that sort of realm. Live resin pre-rolls is expected to actually be one of the top performing form factors in the infused pre-roll segment. So looking at our second poll, this is on markets that were expected to see the most gains from cross-border shopping. All right, New Jersey by far the biggest winner. I think that makes a ton of sense. Just the massive population base that you have in the tri-state area, the fact that they're close to Pennsylvania, which is still going to be a few years out from adult use sales, even if they do legalize this year. New Jersey is the obvious winner here. Some people also thought New Mexico, and I think there's a lot of great reason for that. Texas represents one of the biggest untapped opportunities in cannabis. Tons of consumers in Texas, huge population. Rising consumer rates, but no legal access, really limited medical program. So the fact that a lot of people might be coming over to New Mexico makes a whole ton of sense there. Montana, similar results there, but a lot of the limited markets that border Montana are much smaller in population. So makes sense that comes in at, is that coming in at third? Yeah, coming in at third there. All right, thank you so much for that participation. And we can get on to our third poll. Okay, yeah, it looks like Minnesota legalizing adult use was the big winner in this one. A lot of reasons for this. Minnesota Democrats, as I said earlier, signaling that they want to prioritize adult use sales or adult use legalization in 2023. And we're already seeing some movement in the Minnesota legislature on cannabis. Even if legalization's chances in 2023 have improved, I think it's important to keep in mind that we shouldn't expect legal sales to start in 2024 and maybe not even in 2025. They're coming on the back of a very limited medical program, so there will probably be a big lead up to that before we actually see adult use active in Minnesota. So thank you so much for everybody for participating in these polls. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Rick to help drive our Q&A section. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brendan, so much. I know I certainly got a lot out of those predictions, and I'm sure all of our attendees did as well. So just a couple of questions that have come through that I think everyone would probably be interested in some of the answers in. So Brendan, our first question, I know we looked at the size of some of those specific dabbable categories, but how big is rosin specifically within the vape and the edible categories respectively?
Yeah, so we've already seen some brands in the edible space exploring rosin as their go-to form factor for what they're infusing their edibles with. This is still a fairly niche trend, and it's mostly confined to mature markets. But as interest in rosin in the vape and dabbable categories grows, I think that we're going to see a lot more brands utilizing rosin in their edibles. When we look at the vape category, there's definitely more share for rosin there already. Distillate still makes up the vast majority of vape cartridges. So it's looking like 60% of vape cartridges across BDSA tracked markets are distillate carts. Across markets that we track, we see rosin coming in at about a 1% share of dollar vape cartridge sales. However, when you filter down into more mature markets like Colorado, we see rosin already making up a much bigger share of the vape category. So for Colorado, we've seen rosin vape carts grow from about a 9% share of vape cart dollar sales in early 2022 to about a 15% share of vape cart dollar sales in November of 2022. So already making big gains in the vape department. Edibles, some brands, especially top performing brands, I know a few in California that are utilizing rosin as their additives, but it's not as big of a trend yet.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Brendan, for that response. So we have another really cool question coming in here, more specific to consumers. So how do we think that consumers are going to adapt post-pandemic when it comes to purchasing in states that do not offer delivery or direct-to-consumer sales?
That's interesting. I think that delivery is becoming something that more and more markets will adopt. So I think that markets that don't have access to it, it's on the way in those states. That's just my feel on it. As far as how consumers are adapting, if they're only able to go with storefront retail, I think more and more consumers are knowledgeable about like the brand landscape in their state, and they'll be going for those brands consistently, going back to them, and sort of having more brand loyalty. I think that's a trend that could increase curbside pickup. A lot more people who are concerned about the pandemic still in those states that limit delivery are likely to do curbside. They're likely to, try and spend less time in retail. We've already seen a trend of retailers make moves to sort of move from the deli style environment that we traditionally saw in early medical markets to more of a, refined, sleek, high volume CPG style environment. There's definitely some stores in, for example, Las Vegas that see a massive number of consumers every day. And I think that's going to be more the trend going forward. So a few different avenues that consumers will have to approach that one.
Awesome. Yeah, and if I could just expound upon that a little bit as well. So for those states that are still waiting on delivery or potentially even direct to consumer operations to build up, I would say one of the things that we've seen consumers move very quickly to and adopt post-pandemic has also been pre-ordering. For a lot of folks, it's almost second nature, but we have to remember that this is somewhat of a relatively new development in some markets. So definitely, for those that are on the line that are looking to engage with consumers, especially those consumers that might be a little bit more planned out and less likely to take those impulse purchases, when they're actually in the store, making sure that your menu is online, either a menu aggregator or linked to a menu aggregator, or even on your own properties, I think can go a long way, because certainly we're seeing consumers continue to rely on things like pre-order, both for research purposes, but also just as another added convenience to plan before they get into the store. So we got a couple more time for maybe two more questions here, Brendan. So we have another one coming.
One that I saw from Dana Perkins that I wanted to jump in on.
Yep.
Wondering where you see the beverage category going this year compared to last. Many predict growth, but what are the numbers telling you? So looking at beverage share, we're seeing most markets top out at about 8 or 9% share of total dollar edible sales when it comes to the beverage category. There was a lot of hopes that beverages would capitalize on this trend towards fast-acting edibles and get a foothold in legal markets. But I think one thing holding the beverage category back is it doesn't offer the same convenience that something like a candy edible might for a consumer who wants to easily dose something and a consumer who wants something that's portable and on the go. There's definitely a space for beverages, and we're expecting beverages to hold, in that sort of 8 to 10% range, depending on the market, if they allow that form factor. But we're not expecting massive growth in the beverage category.
It's great. And then Brendan, I think time for maybe one more. So this one looks like it's more specific to pricing. So you all have mentioned pricing in mature markets and how some saw more compression than others. Which markets saw the least compression?
So there's a whole range across BDSA tracked markets. The markets which were sort of at a starting point where prices were already lower saw the least price compression when we're talking about that period from Q3 2021 to Q3 2022. I think that out of the markets that we track, Colorado had the lowest price compression. It's about 10% in that period from late 2021 to late 2022. Sort of on the side that saw a bit more, Missouri saw a much more significant price compression. I think it was over 40% across this period. A big piece of that is coming from the fact that Missouri is a newer market. They still had a developing brand and product landscape. They still had a lot of cultivators that were ramping up. So as that supply increased a lot, as the brand landscape became more competitive, prices are expected to drop somewhat. So I feel like that was a big contributing factor. Nevada also saw, I mentioned Arizona, but Nevada also saw, I think, about 25% price compression across this same period. They were dealing with, Nevada market has been dealt a really rough hand since COVID and the recovery because a lot of Nevada sales are dependent on tourism in Vegas. But 25% price compression is pretty significant across this period.
Great. Okay, well, we're coming up just on time here. So with that, just wanted to say again that you will be receiving a copy of this deck as well as the recording after the conclusion of this webinar. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you for submitting your responses to our poll questions as well as submitting some of your own great questions. Have a great day, and thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Rick.